So I listen to a lot of different things and follow along with various different kinds of people, um, both from the left and the right in terms of viewing the world. And I just gotta tell you, I just don't have the energy to pursue either one of those sides aggressively. Whenever I turn um, listen to either one of them, and generally, if it's the lab, that always makes me really dumpy and like upset and kind of just like the world's falling apart. Um, and then on the right, uh, it just feels always so commercial to me, and all of it just makes me feel on either extreme. Just this, it makes me feel like uneasy. Um, and I just don't have the energy to pursue any of these things with as much vigor as they end up doing. I think that's a bit of my voice in this world, particularly in this whole podcast space. Um, in the broader space of things is just like I'm not necessarily that energetic to be fired up about any particular issue. And I mean, I often think with that as like, yeah, there are issues, if you take it from the left, um, yeah, there are systematic issues that exist in this world. And yes, I do recognize them. And yes, there are real pain in the behind. Um, and, the world can be falling apart in 100 years. You pick the issue. Um, and that may be the case. However, I don't necessarily believe that as much. And then, on the right, where it's like pick yourself up by the bootstraps kind of mentality is kind of like, yeah, sort of. If given the right circumstance, the right situation, and all of the right information and all of that kind of stuff, yeah, that does work out. Um, but it's the fact is like, how do you get there, right? How do you get that information? How do you fight the sort of stereotypes and all those kind of things? And I just feel like I just honestly don't have the energy to be so hyped up about this stuff at this point. Um, they're both valid in terms of the take on how things actually work. There's something that is interesting that somebody told me about, years ago, and it makes sense if you go to one extreme and the other, and they kind of bite themselves like like a snake, that they bite their tail, and they essentially be, that they're the same thing. Um, and how do we do things so that we can make adequate decisions often? You have to often take things into consideration and, make the judgment call that sort of makes the most amount of sense. And it's usually often kind of in the middle, um, where there are some elements to both of them. And I realize, like, if you were to take a very hard extreme on either one, they probably would kind of sort of work. But getting to that extreme is way different, and it's really challenging. When you put regular normal people into into making decisions and doing normal things, they just don't operate on those extremes. People just don't have that energy to be so hepped up all the time, um, and to be so gung ho. So I just like I'm a happy medium in the middle, kind of. Some might say blasé, but it seems to work. And it's just whenever we get too hepped up about one particular thing in our family, in our life, everything kind of gets thrown out of kilter. So it's more of kind of not necessarily a balance, but like a quickly vibrating um, yo-yo or something along those sides is vibrating quickly back and forth between what's going on and even our like parenting styles and stuff is the same sort of way, you know, uh, where depending on where it is, you sort of find, depending on the particular moment and the particular issue, we might sort of sway really one way over another in terms of like how people view these things, right? Like, and to me, it's like it's not really an issue. I always find it really strange that we have to sort of put things into either or, and if you fall into like one camp, then all of your things have to resonate with one particular thing. I think that makes no sense to me. I think the world is a lot more nuanced, a lot more complicated to say one way or the other. And so if you were to look at some of the things we do, it would seem like, oh yeah, you know what that is? That's kind of that sort of feels very right leaning. Um, however that might be. And then yeah, a lot of things are people are gonna be like, well, that seems really like left leaning and really like, oh, like um so, to give an example, we love to encourage entrepreneurship and you know, get goingness in our family. And so we don't do allowance. Um, we've got in our family we kind of have like a little economy. If you do the work, you'll get paid for it. And we tend to be a little bit generous with how much we pay, but always has to be, you got to do the work. So, you're cutting the grass. So in our neighborhood, um, I think our kids are the only ones that ever cut the grass, and do yard work. I don't think we've ever seen anybody else, at least in anywhere, um, do yard work. And yet, this is probably making, and my wife and I combined, we do okay. And yet we still encourage that, right? It's not that we can't afford all these kind of things. It's good and healthy behavior to ensure that, you know, people understand or our kids understand where money comes from. And if you were to look at that, you'd be like, oh, that's really like, um, very capitalistic and all that kind of stuff. Like, no, that's just where money comes from. Or sometimes, my wife has done this, which is like staggering. She's given a boatload of money if they get an A. Remember one test a few years ago, I think it was like, uh, at least for us, it was a lot of money. For me, it was staggering. And to get an A or 100% or something like that on a test, and it worked. Um, you know, and it was totally fine. Some people might hear that and say that's nonsense and really like right leading, but it was good. Um, and then on the other side, we tend to parent very often very softly. I think me and my wife are a little different on these two things. She's a little bit more stricter, but we combine. Um, we tend to be pretty generous and soft, and the where you would everything's rosy and hunky dory and all that kind of stuff, right? Um, which would be probably a little bit more on the left side, or we try to help out, um, recognize that there are differences in this world that do matter. We try to teach that kind of stuff, and that sometimes it's hard for people to not come out of challenging experience that they have. Um, And all these things, if we look at it, I think it's a much, at least for us in our family, I think it's a much more healthier way to view the world. It doesn't allow us to be stuck in any one way of thinking. We don't get into like one very extreme or the other. Um, Although I think given where we live in it in the certain region of the world, maybe just by simply recognizing this and talking about it, maybe recognize this as one particular way of leading of the world. But that's okay. Um, and I think a lot of people in this world are just kind of fed up with the nonsense of it all, with the sort of tension um, and you know, I think most people that live real life, other than people that are like really into politics and stuff like that, um, tend to just be like, yeah, we're kind of in the middle. I think most people sit there. Um, it's just really fascinating, and I think it's just a much more healthier, less stress free way of living about the world. Um, and it allows you to interact with the world a lot more. It allows you to recognize nuance, um, and allows us to hang out with many different kinds of people from all kinds of different walks of life. Because I think that that's actually healthy um, to be able to do that, which gets us into problems sometimes. But in general, it's very healthy to recognize a lot of nuance, not get too fired up about things so much and put my foot in my mouth many times. But I think it's, recognizing to not get so anxious about one way or the other. Um, it's lived experience. I think it's just really helpful to do that. And I think as I get older, I get more mellowed out, um, more and more so because, you know, everybody has a basic say, and every side is kind of right. Um, do I think it's like crazy, for example, that student loan and things like that are just like written off? That's like insane. It's a bad precedent. Um, Although it, it might be good in the short term, I think in the long term it's not necessarily all that helpful. Um, so my thoughts is to be easygoing, I think really makes a big difference for everybody, and it's very just helpful on either side. And then in recognizing that there's a lot of nuance that happens, um, that is really incredibly important. There's very few issues that I get super wound up about. Um, Although I think some things are really just dumb, but they're nothing that I'm going to be super wound up about. I think that's healthy. It allows me to live life without going too extreme over it. Um, the only time that I get really upset about things is when somebody generally gets too extreme about things. Um, and it's frustrating to see that extremity of it. Anyways, take care and have a wonderful day.